when THQ started looking like it wasn't going to survive, I think a lot of us in the studio were wondering what our future was going to be. We were wondering what the future of our franchises were going to be. It's Dawn of War, it's Company of Heroes. These are deeply loved products, and to see that stop happening was, I think, for a lot of us was a little bit heartbreaking.
Game development is a tricky balancing act. For small studios with big ideas, there is a need to weigh up creative ambition with business realities. For these burgeoning studios, overextension can often sink the ship before its sails even catch wind. Canadian studio Relic Entertainment is an example of a small, scrappy studio that, through smart decisions and a focused vision, has become an industry-leading developer. Over the course of its 20-year history, it has grown into one of the biggest players in the strategy genre, pioneering gameplay innovations through titles such as Company of Heroes and Dawn of War. But that journey has been far from smooth. While Relic has established itself as an authoritative voice within the strategy genre, many of its successes have been achieved while balanced on a razor's edge, with cancelled projects, buyouts and bankruptcies threatening to cut its dreams short. And as with many studios owned by a major publisher, Relic has been forced out of its comfort zone numerous times, often with unfavourable outcomes. But for its developers, these failures have been as formative to the studio as its successes. For this in-depth look at the studio's storied past, we flew out to Vancouver to reflect on the studio's 20-year legacy, its darkest hours, and how it has, against all odds, helped change the face of strategy. Welcome to Vancouver, British Columbia, home to 2.1 million people, 3 ski mountains, and 44% of the Canadian games industry. This is where Relic Entertainment has always called home, from its humble beginnings as a 2-man operation above a bar to the 190-strong team of developers at the forefront of the strategy genre today. When Alex Garden and Luke Maloney founded Relic, their vision was to become the world's best real-time strategy studio, a lofty ambition when the genre was dominated by titans such as Age of Empires, Command & Conquer, Total Annihilation, and Warcraft. But Relic quickly made its mark with Homeworld. It was the first RTS to completely utilize 3D space, and the first that had persistency through missions. Homeworld is a seminal game that established many of the fundamental principles that the RTS games of today still adhere to.
I don't think Relic had a roadmap. I think it was more immediate and visceral. It started with this sort of tech demo of Homeworld and what Alex Garden called the spaghetti ball, a bunch of strike craft spinning around like a capital ship. And the realization that it would be first out the gate with that sort of technology. I mean, you gotta remember back in the late 90s, everything was sprites. It was pretty groundbreaking, and we saw the opportunity for Relic to be placed on the map.
I went into Alex's office and he had the mothership sitting on the screen, and then all of a sudden he sort of turned the camera, and I just instantly got goosebumps. It just stood out so dramatically compared to the sort of the peers at the time. That became, I think, more challenging later on. The first time around, you're just like, well, I don't know. You just kind of do your thing, and it works or it doesn't. You don't know. Afterwards, it gets a little scarier.
After the success of Homeworld propelled Relic into the spotlight, it followed up its sci-fi classic with Impossible Creatures, which was a somewhat more eccentric take on the RTS. Games publisher THQ, however, saw promise in the chances Relic were taking with the genre and moved to acquire them in 2004. With the backing of THQ, Relic was given the opportunity to realize its ambitions on a much grander scale. Dawn of War allowed the studio to continue innovating, but also leverage Warhammer 40,000, an IP that could be a springboard for its very own blockbuster franchise. But the stability of THQ came with its own risks and questions, chief among them whether or not the influence of a major corporation could change the studio's identity, perhaps compromising what makes Relic, Relic.
I think anytime you get acquired, there's a sense of what will make it through. Will the character of the studio survive? Are they going to come in and change things?
I can recall the purchase being, oh, we're bought now. Oh, okay, cool. Good. THQ was a bit of a surprise in the day. All of a sudden, our finance guy, who usually is strict on everything that would be purchased, would be like, I get a new monitor? Really? Like, I can have 2?
So I think we saw some freedom from that, working with THQ being under their umbrella. We would have been able to have the freedom and the time and the space to develop a game like Company of Heroes.
Company of Heroes is the game that Relic is best known for. It garnered widespread critical acclaim for its nuanced depiction of war and the cost of sacrifice, which it explored through narrative and gameplay. It remains one of the studio's highest rated games, but its development was plagued with uncertainty.
The original vision started with kind of this grandiose paragraph of kind of history and heroism. Then it sort of got boiled down over time to kind of that real soldiers, real battlefields, real war, just to capture the tone and the movement and the language and the kind of all the kinetic violence of what we'd seen in the movies and in documentaries.
The whole sort of mandate was to make real the emotional impact of Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan. They wanted to strip away all the sort of symbolic abstractions that come along with a strategy game and sort of collapse them into something that was more realistic and based on sort of serving that fidelity.
It took a long time before it started to feel like a game, like an experience. Like just to get a single infantryman running around shooting, everything felt crappy. There was no pace or rhythm or anything to any of the combat. And then we had some pretty hard deadlines. We were showing the game, I think, to PC Gamer. And it wasn't until then that things started to come together and you're like, oh, okay, now we see what this game is meant to be. I think that it pushed RTS into areas that people didn't think it could live. It looked like a shooter brought to life, from a drone cam. And I think that still stands out.
By 2006, Relic had cemented its status as a major player in the RTS genre. At this point, its back catalogue included Homeworld, Impossible Creatures, Dawn of War, and the highest rated strategy game of all time, Company of Heroes. Relic had not only met its lofty goal of becoming one of the best RTS studios in the world, it actually turned the whole genre on its head in the process. But at the very peak of its success, Relic began to experience setbacks. THQ wanted to diversify the studio's output. It mandated an expansion into the console shooter market with the outfit and chased the MMO trend with the Company of Heroes Online. Both titles pulled Relic out of its comfort zone and onto unfamiliar ground. Third-person action game The Outfit was Relic's first foray outside strategy, and its inexperience was evident.
I think there was this idea that we had all these sort of high-res assets from COH, and on the executive level, it was like an idea that we could take those and put it into an Xbox game.
I think there was a desire to broaden the kind of business end of things. Maybe make the studio a little more accessible to a bigger audience, which usually is an approach to go after more money.
Given our sort of track record, I think that was kind of one of the first sort of like blemishes on that. For me personally, it was probably a bridge too far. I think like we could have got there, but more incrementally. It always struck me as a project that wasn't developed from the ground up. The feeling of what way can we innovate on a game idea and develop a project out of it. It always felt a bit top down.
And more setbacks followed. After a lukewarm reception, Company of Heroes Online was cancelled. One of the major stumbling blocks for the title was a lack of infrastructure within THQ. The publisher wanted an MMO, but didn't have the ability to support one. Their next release saw them jump back into the world of third-person action, albeit with the Warhammer 40,000 IP that they were already familiar with.
Space Marine, I think, was probably in development for, I'm going to say 3 years, maybe, before it even became Space Marine. It started as something very different, a different IP, different kind of game, and talk about setbacks, a number of different kinds of setbacks, and the team kept trying to find a way through this sort of maze of development. And then we had a license that THQ had for a while.
As soon as that license touched down, one of the higher up designers on the project, he took some Dawn of War assets and he dropped the camera and he hooked up this quick control scheme to it. And everybody gathered around, I was like, holy moly. Once we saw like the raw potential of it, we all dove in on that. And it was not smooth, but because of the clarity of the initial intent, I think that sort of was the thread that pulled the project along. Yeah, but meanwhile, like, you know that cartoon with the dog in the room and he's in this thought bubbles, everything's fine and the room is like on fire. Like in some ways, like with what was going on with THQ in retrospect, we felt like that dog because like we were trying to do the right thing in the midst of like just like, yeah, stuff.
Stuff in this case means the ongoing financial difficulties THQ are facing, the effects of which were starting to trickle down onto the developers and studios under its umbrella. The threat of closure was a constant shadow looming over every member of the Relic team, a fact that was made all the more real when it came to the cancellation of planned future projects, including the continuation of the Space Marine series. As a huge fan of the game, hearing that Relic had a vision for more Space Marine titles but weren't able to deliver on them broke my heart into 40,000 pieces.
Well, I mean, when we found out we weren't going to be able to do those sequels, that was a tough day in the studio. You know, I don't think any development team, you know, enjoys those moments when the future we had mapped out just didn't come to pass. They're dreams of what if that still linger every once in a while in conversations.
The you know, Space Marine team, a number of people have moved on to other companies. They were brought in for their sort of console and platform expertise. I think there were some great things in Space Marine. Space Marine 2 would have been unbelievable. I think just what we had learned on the original. But what are you going to do?
In December 2012, after a string of highly publicized failures, including the misjudged U-Draw tablet, THQ was forced to declare bankruptcy. For the employees, many of whom had been at Relic for most of their careers, the studio, the brands, and their relationships that they'd built over the past 15 years all now hung in the balance.
There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of fear. I think when THQ started looking like it wasn't going to survive, a lot of us in the studio were wondering what our future was going to be. We were wondering what the future of our franchises were going to be.
You know I dusted off my CV at the time. Thankfully, I didn't make a move on that. But you know, I had a family to take care of, personally speaking, and I was trying to see what the parachute might look like.
You worry that all that work is going to get lost and there's going to be nothing for the future. It's Dawn War, it's Company of Heroes. These are deeply loved products, and to see that stop happening was, I think, for a lot of us was a little bit heartbreaking.
It was December of 2012, I believe. And we were in the midst of trying to finish Company of Heroes 2, and all of a sudden we're like, okay, so we're trying to have this game done in a couple months, and all of a sudden we may not have a parent company to ship it. You know, I'm kind of putting my head down, just being like, well, at least finish this, because if there's no finished game, no one wants to buy us.
We were well underway on Company Heroes 2. I mean, it was sort of several months from shipping at that point. So we had something to show. We had something of value to demonstrate. And it sounds a bit morbid, but we had, you know, half a dozen major publishers kind of coming through the studio and kicking the tires and checking the pulse of the team. And you know, it felt like we were going to land somewhere.
In January 2013, an auction of THQ's various assets was approved. As studios and IPs were dissected and put up for auction, the devs back in Vancouver just had to sit back and wait for the word on the fate of Relic. At this time, dissolution became a very real possibility.
So I think at the time we weren't sure if we were going to be split up, or, you know, THQ was looking at a venture capital firm to kind of keep the whole thing together and going, and I guess the judge made a pretty pivotal decision that THQ was worth more torn apart.
It was an auction for an online stream of the auction of THQ's assets. And we were all refreshing and with bated breath, trying to see who would go where.
People from the studio back east that are sending emails reporting in like, these people are bidding and this kind of thing is happening.
We were in a bit of a bidding war, and then Sega came up, and I think ZeniMax and a couple of other studios, you know, came up.
And then Sega.
It's like, well, okay, well, that's really interesting. How does that, you know, Google? And we're trying to figure out what the strategy was, because they had Creative Assembly and they had Sports Interactive, and it's like, well, it's another PC strategy, and they've got PC strategy, and how is this working?
A couple days after the purchase, the president of Sega of Japan came to the office And the thing I remember him saying is, you guys make great strategy games. We bought you because you make great strategy games. Keep making great strategy games.
It was an amazing feeling to suddenly have, wow, you know, Sega wanted us and they paid a lot of money for us, and to have that kind of external validation, to have somebody else recognize that and see the value in it and understand the value in it was hugely gratifying, and that was a really nice feeling.
Relic went from the panic of an uncertain future to the glimmer of hope in the shape of a crowded corporate auction, and then finally to the saving grace of their Sega acquisition. So against the odds perhaps, Relic are still around today and are celebrating their 20th anniversary. From what started as the plucky underdog taking on genre giants, it has managed to weather multiple storms and come out the other end with its vision for the strategy genre as clear as ever.
I feel like sometimes if I was to picture Relic as a person, it'd be like Neo in The Matrix and like just the bullets flying at them, and he's like, phew. And I don't know if it's just sheer luck. I don't know if it's like tenacity.
We see what we want to build, and then we build it. It turns out people like that. And so we keep doing that. You know, that's gonna be what drives a successful studio. What is the magic?
Stubborn determinism. You know, I think we've kept strategy in view, but I think collectively the franchises we've done have they've stood the test of time. They've had great critical acclaim. They've been interesting and innovative, and they're uniquely Relic. I think all of them, even as different as some of them are, they're uniquely Relic.
Thank you so much for watching this video all about the history of Relic. Now, I've been playing Relic games since I was a kid. I still play them as an adult, so it was a real honor to talk to the guys at Relic, share their story and share their legacy with you. If you want to see more, then you can watch the Making of Dawn of War 3 video that we put up last week, and make sure you leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'm going to be in there over the next few days, talking to you guys, hearing your thoughts, filling in any spaces that I can, so make sure you get in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Also, I'm sorry that Space Marine 2 isn't happening.